Hello and welcome to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. I'm Ksenia Svetlova. ROPES stands for the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. We are working towards a post-conflict Middle East by connecting forward-thinking Israeli and Palestinian emerging leaders with like-minded peers across the region and promoting peaceful solutions and regional integration. If you are looking for more information on ROPES, please visit our website, ropes.org. Our special guest today is Ambassador Hesham Youssef. Ambassador Youssef served as Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian, Cultural and Social Affairs of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and completed his term in July 2019. From 2001 to 2014, he served as a senior official in the Arab League, as official spokesman and later the Chief of Staff to Secretary General Amr Moussa. And between 2012 and 2014, Ambassador Youssef was the senior advisor to the Secretary General of the Arab League, Dr. Nabil Al-Arabi, on issues pertaining to crisis management, as well as the reform of the Arab League. Ambassador Youssef has worked extensively on conflict resolution in the Middle East, and in particular, the Arab-Israeli conflict, reconciliation in Iraq, and situation in Sudan. Ambassador Youssef, hello and welcome to the ROPESCAST. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you for inviting me. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Ambassador Youssef, I'm following your writings and your activities, I think from the days that you work alongside with Amr Moussa, who at the time was the Secretary General of the Arab League. And, for me, I think that many people in the region, they're very curious to understand whether the region can organize itself, in a fashion that the European Union, for example, was organized, taking the most positive sides of policy, economy, overcoming the grudges, overcoming the difficulties, and come to this understanding that we are better when we are working together. And with your extensive experience in the Arab League and also Organization of Islamic Conference, I think that, it will be fascinating to hear your take on that.
Well, I wish it was possible. Unfortunately, especially now, it is becoming much more difficult because the region is in turmoil. We have a number of failed states, a number of vulnerable states. The economic situation is dire in a large number of countries. And we are not getting our act together in as far as stability is concerned, in as far as, good governance, prospects towards prosperity and so on. So I think there is a long way to go before we can achieve a success similar to the success that was achieved in Europe by the European Union. I hope that this, starts in the near future, but I have my doubts as a result of the fact that we have all these conflicts, all these problems, all these differences between countries, and this unfortunately doesn't augur well for the prospects of integration and cooperation in the region.
Well, I think that we share the realistic viewpoint, because you as a diplomat who, were in the many junctions of problems and conflicts that troubled our region, and myself as a journalist. But at the same time, I'm recalling what happened in Europe prior to the existing of the European Union, the World War II, the millions and hundreds of millions of dead people and horrific tragedy. The Holocaust, of course, in the middle of all of that, but in any case, I don't think that in 1944, somebody was envisaging that Europe can be united, especially, with the division between the Soviet Union and the Western countries, and yet it happened somehow.
Well, yes, it did happen, but also don't forget that they start in a practical way. They started by the coal and steel agreement. They started by saying, okay, what can we achieve in a step-by-step approach? And at that time, as you mentioned, after the end of the World War II, there was huge destruction in the whole of Europe, and they wanted energy, and they wanted steel for rebuilding. And this is what they agreed on. And then they took it from there, step by step, until they reached, the level of integration that they have reached already. But also, we have to indicate that democracy plays a role in advancing integration. Because when leaders are pressured by their own people to integrate because they feel that this is to the advantage of ordinary people, job creation, ease of movement, cooperation in all kinds of fields, investment, trade, and so on, this is absolutely crucial. We haven't been able to reflect that in our relations. And unfortunately, also in the Arab world, they started by talking about unity, and it was not achieved. So they did not start, except more recently, by going a step-by-step approach, by trying to see how they can have a free trade agreement, and then after that, a customs union, and then after that, further modes of integration, and so on. Perhaps even the Gulf Cooperation Council, that have very similar economic situations in different countries of the GCC, they achieved a lot of progress. But then when there were political problems, there were huge setbacks at the same time. I hope they recover from the problems, because things have been improving, but still political difference remain an obstacle to advancing integration, even in a small group that is like-minded and does not have financial difficulties like the GCC. But still, we see that integration is not that easy, and it is more or less easier said than done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's easy to entertain ourselves with visions such as, for example, the vision of President Biden that foresees the unification of, at least geographically, India, Middle East, then Europe, to have this rails and ties of commerce and so on. But when we see what is happening today, when the region actually becomes more divided, it's very hard to basically attach, make this attachment between in correlation, between the vision and the practical steps that has to precede.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I think that we always have to start from the baby steps. And in this regard, I will ask you about this, of course, what is the most burning subject of today? And this is the war in Gaza. I think that during this last month, we saw an increase in diplomatic activity throughout the Middle East, and specifically in two countries, which are Egypt, which was always the hub of this regional diplomacy, and Saudi Arabia. And you're very much familiar with both. As we see now, the Egyptian initiative of basically the last moment in an attempt to save the region from perhaps further deterioration and escalation. We see the Saudis who are reinventing perhaps the Arab Peace Initiative. Do you think that, this moment, that is indeed a moment of pain and danger and threat and suffering can perhaps become a turning point for Arab diplomacy, for understanding that the Arabs also need to take these initiatives into their hands in order to push them forward and to shape, the future of the region, that the regional forces will be shaping them and not outside forces?
Well, Ksenia, I slightly differ with what you said in relation to that Egypt has been active in the last month or so, and Saudi Arabia as well, in relation to reinvigorating the Arab Peace Initiative. I think Egypt has been active right from day one since the war started. And they have been working very hard to see how a ceasefire can be achieved, similar to the efforts that was done by Egypt in 2021, in 2014, and 2008, 2009. So Egypt has always tried to see how to restore stability in the region, sometimes on its own and sometimes with the help of others. This also happened in the last few years in the effort between Egypt, Jordan, the United States, in the Aqaba Sharm process, when we were having, a number of important religious festivals and festivities and occasions taking place at the same time. And there were prospects of and fears of escalation, and they worked together to see how this would not affect the situation in the region. This also applies to Saudi Arabia. The issue of trying to advance the Arab Peace Initiative once again took place 2 years ago, when in 2022, when there was a commemoration of 20 years after the Arab Peace Initiative. And this was an initiative that took place between Saudi Arabia, the Arab League, Egypt, and Jordan with the help of the European Union. So this took place much earlier than what we are witnessing today in Gaza. So there were efforts to revive the Arab Peace Initiative and try to see how we can advance the prospects of peace despite all difficulties, even before the war. Now the situation has become much more difficult and much more complicated, but there were efforts at the time. I have to indicate that the vast majority of the difficulties at that time, even when this effort was starting, and also there were similar efforts that were taking place in the context of the Negev Forum, where Egypt was working with a number of Arab countries that have normalized recently with Israel to see how also to advance the prospects of peace, even though the Negev Forum was seen as a forum that would address other issues and not necessarily focus on the political issues. So there were a lot of efforts, but sadly, Israel has a coalition that is finding it very difficult to advance the prospects of peace, whether it's in relation to a final settlement, endgame horizon, whatever it is. It has been difficult to deal with the current coalition in Israel in relation to advancing the prospects of peace.
Ambassador, maybe for the sake of those listeners who are unfamiliar with the concept of the Arab Peace Initiative, it's a household name, but not many people know what it actually means. So maybe if you just in a few sentences can remind us, because I remember it very well, as a young journalist, it was absolutely astounding moment. I'm, still very sorry that it didn't take off. The Israeli government until this day didn't answer officially to this initiative. But please, if you can just remind us what all, this initiative is about.
Well, let me say a few words about the background of the Arab Peace Initiative. The Arab Peace Initiative came also at the request of a number of important international powers, including the United States and Europeans and so on. Because before the Arab Peace Initiative, the position of the Arab world was that peace is the strategic choice of the Arab world. And the US and the Europeans and others came to the Arab world and they were saying, well, this is very important and crucial in relation to the final approach and the philosophy behind the approach, but we need some details. And then came the initiative that was pioneered initially by Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince Abdullah at the time, who became the King of Saudi Arabia. And this initiative was presented in an Arab summit that took place in Beirut in 2002. And the essence of the initiative is that once Israel withdraws from the occupied Palestinian territories, a Palestinian state is established, an agreed solution is reached between the Palestinians and Israel in relation to refugees, then all the Arab countries will be establishing normal diplomatic relations with Israel. This is, as you know, the core of the issue. Once a Palestinian state is established along the lines of the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, we find an agreed solution between the Palestinians and the Israelis regarding refugees, then all the Arab countries would have normal diplomatic relations with it. This was also adopted by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Therefore, it's not only all the Arab countries, but all the Islamic countries as well, were part of the understanding that once this is achieved, then also Islamic countries would normalize relations with Israel as well.
Well, we are today, I think, even more far from the realization of this initiative than we were in 2002, aren't we?
Well, yes and no. As a matter of fact,
Right.
as a result of the war on Gaza, more and more powers are realizing that the time has come to end the conflict. And ending the conflict is supposed to be based on international law and what was agreed by the international community in different Security Council resolutions and otherwise in all kinds of initiatives that had been taking place for the last 3 decades since the Madrid Peace Conference, is to have a solution that is based on the two-state solution. Yes, I know the difficulties, I know the challenges, I know that the Israeli public opinion is not in this place at this point in time, but this is where leadership is needed. And once we have leadership that is willing to be as brave as President Sadat and Begin were in achieving a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, or achieving a peace treaty between Jordan and Israel, I think once we have leadership of that nature, I think it can happen and progress can be achieved on that front, but there are requirements for this to take place.
Well, I have to just mention that, of course, the Israeli public opinion had shifted tremendously after the events of 10/7, after the massacre, but also the Palestinian public opinion. You are looking at the polls and you see massive support for Hamas in the West Bank. Hamas opposes the two-state solution. It always had, and it actually did everything possible to derail the Oslo process in the 90s, along with the extremists from the Jewish side, of course. So the spoiler seems to be very, very powerful. And my question to you is, do you see, how did we learn in this 30 years of peace process that is currently going nowhere, to deal with the spoilers? I'm talking about spoilers such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but also, of course, the more senior level of spoilers such as Iran, countries that obviously object to this reality that has to take place of the two-state solution and peaceful agreements between Israel and its neighbors.
Well, let me differ again with you, Ksenia, about that. No, I don't think that the Palestinians have forgone the solution that is based on establishing a Palestinian state. And I don't think that the popularity of Hamas is as high as you think it is. And as far as the two-state solution is concerned, I think a large portion of the Palestinians are in support of the two-state solution. The problem is that they feel that it is no longer possible. So those who have deserted the two-state solution have deserted it because they feel that it is no longer possible. And those who are arguing for one state, those who are arguing for confederation, those who are arguing for all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I think the vast majority of people in the world believe that the solution has to be reached in the context of some form of separation. This does not mean that there will be no cooperation or no even integration between Israelis and Palestinians. I think Israelis and Palestinians know each other more than any two peoples in the region. And they will work together once peace is achieved. I have no doubt in my mind that this would be the case, but then we need to reach that point. Hamas is also popular because partly they feel that the Palestinian Authority has not been effective. The Palestinian Authority has been saying for the last few decades that peace can be achieved through negotiations. And unfortunately, they don't have any progress to show to the people to say, well, as a result of negotiations that took place in the last 3 decades since Oslo, there isn't that much. So they don't have much to show for. Yet, when Hamas makes all kinds of things, takes all kinds of steps, we have seen some benefits coming to the Palestinians. One of them, for example, was the exchange of Shalit in return for over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. So when Palestinians see that something of that nature resulted in the release of prisoners, then they say, well, these are results that we're seeing. When they see that as a result of the hostages that they have taken, that there were some who were released, then they say, well, some prisoners were released as a result of the catastrophe that took place on the 7th of October. So there is another question of trying to see how to incentivize those who are arguing for peace, not those who are arguing for violence. And at the end of the day, for the last few decades, the agreement amongst Palestinians and in the Arab world was that the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, will be the one that will be negotiating on behalf of the Palestinian people. This is the body that was recognized by the international community as the sole representative of the Palestinian people. And it was agreed that once an agreement is reached, it will be put to a referendum by the Palestinian people, and they will decide whether to agree or not. And what I have seen in the last 30 years is that the Palestinians have been supporting any step towards peace. Even Oslo changed the atmosphere at the time, 30 years ago, when people thought that, well, this is a step towards ending the conflict. But then it didn't happen. So there are those who are giving an opportunity for those most extreme elements on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side and Iran and etc., for things not to advance in a direction that would allow peace to prevail. And it is the role of those who are fighting and struggling to achieve peace to see how progress can be achieved in order for people to realize that, no, there is hope and there is a prospect for the situation to improve and for this conflict to end once and for all. Without this, then we will continue to be in serious trouble.
Well, Ambassador, you know that the organization that happened to lead ROPES, that you are very familiar with, the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security, we believe in integration, even regional integration of both peoples, Israel and the Palestinians. And very often, when we happen to be in Arab countries, it seems that people are eager to know, to learn about ways how can they contribute to the resolution of the conflict? How can they help? Because people feel that they don't have a voice, and sometimes the extremists are speaking, for them. But this was before 10/7, and we cannot not, refer to this tremendous trauma. For me, as an Israeli, I know what it does to my community, and I certainly know what it does also to the Palestinians. I would like to ask you about this, I would say divide, I don't know, maybe a gap. You tell me how it's better to refer it, between the leaderships of the Arab countries and what is happening on the ground, on the street. I think that we see pragmatic politics that is prevailing in this region. And, within this frame, all of these efforts of Egypt and United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are taking place. But at the same time, we see that on the Arab street, a lot of people basically say, well, we wish that Israel would disappear. We wish that there would be no Israel whatsoever. Jews, for them to come back to their own countries. And this is something that I can tell you, frankly, do you think that it can change these attitudes? How deep does it go? Because, I still remember very much the song that was written about Secretary General Amr Moussa, Ana Bakra Israel, Ana Bachab Amr Moussa in Egypt. Yes, I hate Israel, I love Amr Moussa. So it seems that it's running very, very deep, isn't it?
Well, I will disagree with you again. See,
this is why we're speaking. It's fun to
yes,
disagree.
Well, you see, as you know, this is much more complicated than to put it in this way. As a matter of fact, I think it is exactly the opposite. It is not that a majority of people in the Middle East want Israel to disappear. No. Many countries are dealing with Israel as a fact and as part of the region, but all what they are saying is that we hope that this conflict ends through ending occupation. It is as simple as that. And what happened in the peace treaties that took place between Egypt and Israel and between Egypt and Jordan, and then the normalization, the new normalizers, as we call them, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, the message that was sent as a result of these new normalization efforts is to tell Israel and public opinion in Israel that you are accepted in the region and you are welcome in the region. But this does not mean that we are going to accept the continuation of this conflict. And as a matter of fact, as a result of this war, I think some of the messages going from the United Arab Emirates to public opinion in Israel is, if you want the warm peace that was promised, and we saw some elements going in this direction, you can't be having this war in Gaza and the current level of atrocities on the people of Gaza and expect warm peace. It will not happen. It is not that people in the United Arab Emirates want Israel to disappear, or the people in Morocco or Bahrain want Israel to disappear. Absolutely not. Or even Jordan and Egypt. This is not the case. And this is not the case in the vast majority of the Arab countries. There are there fringe, parts of society that believe in that? Of course. There are extremists everywhere in the world who have all kinds of crazy ideas. But this is not what the vast majority is saying. What the vast majority of the people in the region are saying is, let us get this occupation over once and for all, and let us resolve this conflict. And to be very frank with you, the problem that we have is a problem that we have an Israeli establishment that is saying no to almost everything. And this was before October 7th. I'm not talking about after October 7th because I know we are in a different world. But even before October 7th, you go to the Israeli government, they tell you no two-state solution, no one-state solution, no response to the Arab Peace Initiative, as you mentioned. Okay? As far as refugees are concerned, zero refugees. We will not allow refugees to return. And this is in contrast to the Israeli positions only a few years earlier that was discussing numbers of refugees to return. Okay, what else? Well, the whole of Jerusalem belongs to Israel. So when you have positions of that nature, and when you have an Israeli establishment that continues to grab more and more Palestinian land and build settlements on these Palestinian lands, what should you expect from those who want a Palestinian state to be built on this land? So there can't be anything except opposition to an approach that is based on saying no to everything. It reminds me of the Arab world when they were saying no. So now the Arab world is saying yes, and we are providing initiative, and we are providing ideas. And even after the Arab Peace Initiative was adopted, and there were ideas for additional things to advance the prospects of peace, like land swaps. What did the Palestinians say and what did the Arab world say? Absolutely okay. We're ready for land swaps, as long as they are equal in value and area and etc. So this was accepted. It was also accepted that a Palestinian state would be demilitarized. This was also accepted. So there are those who are trying, because you can't establish a Palestinian state that would have as its aim to have wars with Israel. This would be a small state that is weak and that would be focused mainly on its development and etc. to make up for the time that they lost through the last 7 decades of occupation.
Well,
So
I will be an advocate for the devil for a second, and I'll tell you that Abraham agreements, they were conceived at a time when Prime Minister Netanyahu was also a prime minister, and his government was rather, right-wingish, and they built settlements. And, many people in Israel said at the time that, that if the Arab world agrees to have normalization with Israel while all of this taking place, then it means that maybe it's ready to accommodate even this kind of behavior. So this is, again, I'm telling you how it was perceived at the time in 2020, it will be 4 years already this year. Indeed, time flies. Many right-wing commentators in Israel, they derived exactly this conclusion, that you can go on, with this kind of behavior and still have nice peace agreements with a few Arab countries.
Well, yes and no, because the United Arab Emirates indicated that they were willing to take this step in order to have a suspension of annexation. Morocco took this step for totally different reasons. Morocco took this step, and the price was paid by the United States rather than Israel. So the United States adopted the Moroccan position in relation to the Western Sahara. Okay? So a price was paid in both cases, and for different reasons, and they were willing to do that. But also the Emiratis linked what they did to advancing prospects of peace. And they were saying, we saved the two-state solution by stopping annexation. And then, more recently, when the United States started talking about the prospects of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, the United States has been saying time and again that this would require a substantive element in relation to advancing the prospects of peace. And Saudi Arabia has been saying exactly the same. They have been saying, and after the current war, they are saying, well, we want a credible and irreversible process towards a two-state solution in order for us to take this step. And they are willing to do that. And Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman mentioned in an interview with Fox that there is progress and that they are willing to advance on that path, provided that there is also advancement on the prospects of peace towards the two-state solution. So this argument of peace for peace that has been advocated by all kinds of people in the Israeli establishment, sure, they can argue whatever they wish, but at the end of the day, they will have to face reality. And if I go back also to what you mentioned earlier about Egypt and Jordan, and the Israeli complaint that this is called peace. And when will this become a warm peace after 45 years of the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty? And the answer is very simple. We have to have an end of the conflict in order for this to be a warm peace. Other than that, it will not be warm. Yes, of course, Egypt believes that this treaty is strategic, is crucial, it will have to be respected, and has continued to respect it for the last 45 years. But it is also sending a message to public opinion in Israel to say, we can't forget about the Palestinian issue. It has to be resolved as well. So I hope that public opinion in Israel would also understand that in order to have warm peace between Israel and the region, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has to come to an end.
Ambassador, I would like to ask you also to reflect, and this would be my final question as we are nearly running out of time. Our organization, ROPES, we are working with young people, with young leaders, young opinion makers. And very often people come to us and they ask us basically, what can we do? Because specifically now in the time of crisis, when people feel that they're powerless, They are voiceless, they want to do something. What would your advice would be to the young people here in the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, the Arab countries, those who want to contribute something to the solution, not to the destruction? It's much easier to contribute to the destruction, but those who want to be creative, what should they do?
Well, first, let me indicate that our generation should apologize to the young people because we have failed miserably in trying to advance the prospects of peace. And probably we will be passing this conflict to them to deal with it. And this is very sad. And but this is reality as well. And they will have to prepare themselves to see how they are going to deal with this issue. And I hope they will be more successful than we have been in dealing with this conflict. There are some things that they can do, but I have to admit that it is also limited, because at the end of the day, the decisions are made by the current leaders and the current coalitions and the current establishments and so on. But they can put pressure on these leaders to tell them to do what needs to be done in order for the situation to advance. And they need to talk to each other to understand where each and everyone are coming from. So Israeli public opinion, the young people in Israel are not talking to the Palestinians, and they need to talk to them. Of course, the Palestinians also need to talk to young people in Israel, but they're finding it very difficult, because I've been dealing with all kinds of people, young and old, that have been trying to advance the prospects of peace. And what they have been saying to me recently, well, we've been talking for many, many years, and we haven't been able to achieve anything, so why continue to talk? Well, I don't think there is any other way to resolve conflict except through dialogue, negotiations, with the help of mediators, others, and so on, in order for this conflict to end. And there is no easy way about that. But I also have to indicate that the responsibility of Israel is much greater than that of any others, because at the end of the day, it is the occupying power. Yes, security of Israel is crucial, and Israel has to get security in order for this conflict to end. But then this has to be within reason. And if you are worried about security, then even within the current situation and the war that is ongoing, you can't keep dragging thousands of hectares of land for new settlements in the West Bank and think that people would be willing to say, well, things are advancing.
Yes.
So we have to see how we can be serious in advancing the prospects of peace. And I wish that young people would be much more successful than we have been in achieving this objective.
They absolutely have to be. Thank you so very much, Ambassador. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a guest today of the ROPESCAST.
Thank you, Ksenia. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Ma salama.
Ma salama.
You've been listening to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. Our guest today was Ambassador Hesham Youssef, a seasoned diplomat who worked within the frame of the Arab League and Organization of Islamic Cooperation. We hope you enjoyed the ROPESCAST. Our podcast is available on Apple Pods, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all quality podcast platforms. We are very grateful to all our listeners in the Middle East, Europe, the US, and other parts of the world. You can support our work by small donation. More details on our website, ropes.org. We also invite you to follow Ropes on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads to find out more about our work with the emerging leaders of the Middle East. I'm Ksenia Svetlova. Shalom and salam.